Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Brian Barkwill from National Grid.
Okay, how are we doing? All right, so before we begin, I'll have everyone introduce themselves. I did want to shout out Mike Bronner. He was supposed to be the fifth panelist today. He is actually welcoming in his second child. So it's a very exciting time. I'm sure we all wish him the best of luck and Godspeed to him and his family. Hopefully everyone's happy and healthy. Now, before we begin, I did want to say this is a really interesting time to be talking about innovation, right? So probably every single party in this room is being asked, how do I do it faster? How do I do it cheaper? How do I do it with less resources, on a quicker schedule? And on top of all of that, how do we do it safer than we've ever done it before? And stealing something from that Bob said earlier, if we're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, are we putting any of us in a position to succeed? And that's kind of where I see innovation. To me, innovation is not really optional if your goal is to make things more efficient, safer, and faster. It is kind of required at that time. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to my panelists who have a broad range of experience on this topic and a lot of views talking about the successes, but also the challenges that can come when you're changing an industry that's done something the same way for 100 years. So we'll start over you with Rod.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm actually not sure what it is. So I've been in the industry for 22 years. I started on the top of a shovel. I started as a laborer, digging in the field. I've worked in engineering offices, and now I run a section of our construction operations for Bond Civil and Utility in New York City and New Jersey.
Hi, everybody. My name's Joe Forline. I am an advisor for the Ad Hoc Group. We support innovative and leading-edge companies as they go through the energy transition. One of the companies we support is 4M. I have over 35 years in the industry. I was senior vice president at Pacific Gas and Electric and was responsible for implementing the pipeline safety management system. And I also had many different responsibilities at Public Service Electric and Gas in New Jersey, including VP of Gas and VP of Customer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Murray. I'm AVP of EH&S at Hallen Construction, and we are a utility contractor in New York City and Long Island.
Hello, all. Alex Miguel, Bancker Construction. Obviously our group here is to talk about driving innovation. I was brought up or asked to speak here because Bancker provides a unique opportunity to not only install gas systems, but also water, electric, telephone, all those other things. So I look forward to being able to show how that can help meet all those goals.
All right, so real quick, Brian Barkwill. I am part of the gas innovation team at National Grid. So let's get started. Alex, this first one is for you. So as we prepare for the next decade of infrastructure demands, where do you think the innovation space will have the biggest impact, and what are some of the challenges that are facing the sector?
So we had a pre-discussion meeting, and a lot of the members up here were speaking about pilot programs and I guess experiments that they've been doing amongst their departments, their companies, the utilities that they work for. Again, Bancker Construction has a unique ability to provide services to multiple different utilities, and that's something that I guess our team sees what can help benefit the future. It's synergy projects where not only you have one utility but another. It helps multiple utilities communicate, schedules, install paths, cost sharing. We've seen from personal experiences where damage prevention ends up becoming a huge benefiter of this, because you have either one contractor working at the same time installing two different systems, or you have two different contractors working at the same time in direct communication saying, this is going to be my lane, this is going to be my install path, this is going to be my depth. So that's kind of where I see a prime opportunity to really capitalize on in the future is how we I guess our methods of install is, everyone here is familiar with paving. Everyone wants to go install their utilities as the paving company comes after. That's a clear cost saving thing. But I think there's an ability to, kind of change that and also use other utilities to follow that same kind of methodology. And that's kind of, I think, where I would encourage utilities to try and reach out, touch base with other owners and see if there's any more collaboration that can be done moving forward.
Awesome. Joe, same question to you, except I would love it if you could, harken back to that 30 years experience with utilities and just how do we stop doing what Bob described as the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Well, one of the things that I like to talk about is it's always been a great time to be in the utility industry, but this is probably the most exciting because there's so many challenges and opportunities in front of us. And, the good news is our product is needed. Electricity growth is exploding across the country, not to use a bad term for gas people. Natural gas is back and in vogue. And understood as being one of the solutions for the future. Of course, distributed energy we're just scratching the surface of the opportunities to utilize that for virtual power plants and other things. And now, of course, AI on top of that with the data centers. There's just a whole series of opportunities in front of us, but sales are growing. People want our product, and how can we deliver it for them as safely and as efficiently as possible? All that being said, safety is still the number one thing, and I would always tell my teams. I said, if you're not proactive on safety, and if you don't put the proper amount of time on safety, you're going to spend a lot more time on safety after you lose a building, or if you don't replace the right main, or if you start a wildfire. So. The stuff we're talking about here this morning about damage prevention is the tip of the spear, right? How do you stop people from digging into your gas line or digging into your electric duct bank so that you don't have a safety incident and cause all of us to be reactive? And so it's one of the things I'm excited about as I sit here today and hear all the different discussion around driving down damages.
Absolutely. And in the innovation space, obviously, it can come in a lot of different facets. And namely, I think what most people do is they'll start small. They'll start with like a pilot, right? And so, Casey, this is for you. But what conditions need to be in place to put a pilot in a position to succeed, right? Whether it be organizational, operational in the field, or workforce related. How does Hallen Construction kind of see the ability to foster a pilot and give it the opportunity it needs to grow?
You need a variety of things, but two things that stand out are, one, the idea of operational learning. You need the people that are closest to work to be involved with the process. In the safety department, if I have everybody in my team address the safety issue, or sitting at the conference table talking about solutions, and then we go implement it, it's probably going to fall flat on its face. If we're not involving the end users in creating that solution, we're doing the worst thing possible. So that's one. Bringing in the guys and gals that are closest to the work, giving them the authority, and then give decision-making closest to the field. The other thing we need to do is, as we do pilots, we need to have some type of monitoring and evaluation system. Just because we're in construction doesn't mean we could be a little bit scientific about our approach. We say it a lot, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you're not managing it, how do you know if it's successful or not? In the world of safety, we look at metrics like TRIR, the total incident recordable incident rate, Because these things thankfully happen so infrequently, we can't rely on a metric like that to define success. So a lot of these things are going to come on a case-by-case basis where we need to use and define proxy measures. We were talking about pilots earlier. We did a pilot with speed bumps. We're not going to wait for a reduction in our workers getting struck by vehicles to say, is this successful or not? Our proxy measure for that is there a reduction in miles per hour versus for vehicles passing by our job site when there are speed bumps versus not speed bumps? That's the area that we need to get towards. So operational learning, that's your foundation, which is really culture, and then two, a robust monitoring and evaluation system based on what you're looking at.
I think that's awesome, and I'm going to change up the questions now because I really like what you just said, which is what metrics can we use and how do we track whether something's successful? And so, Rod, I'm going to throw it over to you, but when we talk about innovation and smarter deliveries, it can be a challenge to quantify those benefits. And so, how are you guys actually measuring success anytime you implement something new, and what are the challenges that you've run into?
Well, that's a big question. So one of the things that we do to make sure that we're tracking how we utilize new technology and new pilots is we obviously start with a control group. That's what Casey mentioned. But from that, we make sure that we get the right initial people in the room, because there's certain people in your organization that are going to see change, understand what it means, know how it solves the problem, and then are able to take it and actually implement it. And you have to have those positive case studies to get momentum within your organization. So when we start something new, we always make sure that we have typically younger people that are very interested in innovation and interested in improving projects or products. And that's how we start. And then from there, we make sure that they're influencing the next layer. Like I always say, there's this thing called the law of 8. If you put 8 people in a room, there's always going to be one person that really likes the idea, understands it, wants to implement it. There's going to be 3 people that understand it but need to have their hand held to implement it. There's going to be 3 people that are going to be very, very difficult to get there, but you can get there with a lot of elbow grease. And there's always going to be one person that's just not going to do it. And you may never get them to implement the change that you want. So I always use that, and I look at innovations within our organization and see which areas and who's utilizing it. And I make sure I have certain leaders on certain projects so that way things get implemented successfully.
Yeah, Joe, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say, no matter what I've worked on in the utility industry, getting the metrics right is one of the most important things. And I'm curious how many of you have a pay metric on their damage rate, or your company has a pay metric on the damage rate. So when I was with PSE&G, 5% of every executive's pay was tied to the damage rate and had to improve every year. And I had it for 10 years. So if I didn't improve it every single year for 10 years, I was responsible for the execs not getting their bonus, right? So you better believe I was looking at Virginia's damage law. I looked at every law in the entire country. And I benchmarked nationwide through CGA, AGA, and we set up our own peer panel to benchmark. And I was seeking every best practice in the industry, whether it was training, new equipment, improvements in mapping, et cetera. And I got support from my executives because all of you, I talked to a lot of people, all of you who work in damage prevention, you got to get electric to do what they're supposed to do, engineering to do what they're supposed to do. You need the legal department, you need external affairs, you need your regulatory group. Your job is to align the entire company around damage prevention, and none of them report to you. But when the whole company has a damage rate target, including all those people, they show up at your meeting, they go meet with the regulator, they show up at the one-call center, and you start to drive that change. But it really comes down to the pay metrics to me. And damage rate to me is the right one. You got to make sure you're looking at your damages, because your damage rate alone can be gamed, right? You just extra tickets, right? So when the cable company came through, I know Sarah said it was a problem, but it was an easy make for your damage rate because you got a lot of tickets. So there's always ways around it, but getting the right metrics, benchmarking, implementing best practices systematically can apply to almost every process, and especially damage prevention.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this, and it's something the entire industry knows is a problem, but silos, right? So how do we communicate the improvements that we've seen here versus to other crews that aren't aware of what you're working on, or vice versa? When someone's working down the street from you and we don't know that crew has damaged them 12 times, as the man said earlier, how do we communicate and break down these silo walls? And so with that, I'll throw it to Casey first, but how are you attempting to break down what has traditionally been a very siloed industry to make sure that everyone's getting the benefit?
So within the contractor space, one of my indicators is if I'm doing well as an executive is how many calls am I getting from people in the field. If it's quiet and if it's just people in my team, it's like, shoot, I'm not going to the field enough. And that's the key. If you're in management, we need to get to the field often, because I think the biggest silo that exists, this is coming from somebody in safety, is not between operations and safety. I think if anything in the management area, we work very well together. It's field versus management. It's this idea of blue line versus black line. What we perceive is what's happening in the field versus what is actually happening in the field. And the only way we can go beyond that is being in the field, understanding the constraints and the context of the work that we do every single day. there was a second point. I just, fleeting thought, it's gone.
That's all right. That's all right. Okay, so I'm going to also throw it to Rod here. So in terms of working in silos and breaking it down, what's an example in your expertise where you all have had to overcome an issue when we were testing something or working in the field where you ran into a silo and everyone can see, like, if this just didn't exist and we had better communication, this whole project would have gone smoother or safer?
So obviously we have silos all over our industry and within our business. We've taken an approach where we're doing a lot more design build work than we previously did. That's actually where 4M plays into a lot of what we're doing because it allows us to get information that we wouldn't normally have relatively easily. In that contracting space, silos are rampant because you've got your client that wants one thing. You usually have, for us, we have an engineering partner that has another mindset, and then we have our own mindset. And the thing that I've found to be the most effective is we break it down and we try to put people together. We try to put people in the same office as often as possible, have in-person meetings. All of our client meetings are on the job where you're actually going to do the work even during the design phase. So everything's always real to each other. So trying to find those opportunities to bring people together and be in person is how I see a lot of the silos that we run into in our industry getting broken down.
Cool. Okay, so one other thing that I think it's really important to touch on when you're talking about innovation is something that goes from a controlled space to an uncontrolled space, right? So you might have a very controlled pilot in a fixed location where you're hyper confident in the results, but then all of a sudden you bring it to the field. You have environmental factors, you have uncertainty, crews that are less trained or less apt for it. And so with this, I'll throw to you, Alex, but whenever you're entering those environments in a completely or not as much of a controlled environment, I should say, what are some of the challenges that you face as you try to test new technologies?
I think one of the biggest challenges is just recognizing the audience that it is intended to assist. Obviously tying this more into the silos and just making sure something's successful is, we work with National Grid specifically. So National Grid will come to us and say, we developed this program, we think it works, and we touched all these departments, so we know we broke down every silo. And then you get to the contractor and it's just like, well, actually, yes, you may be touched with all your departments, but you didn't view it from the contractor's lens. A contractor can't do X, Y, Z, and then for this reason, that program doesn't work. Or sometimes the terminology is different from the utility side to the contractor as it is from contractor to utility. And we see those failures often, or the biggest victims of those failures or those miscommunications is the guys out in the field, where everything is touched from all the different parties. Everything's, every failure is thought out, every bypass is thought of, but we never took the opportunity to view it from down looking up and up looking down. Never had the opportunity to talk to the guys out in the field and just make sure that it's something that they can comprehend, something that they can understand, and something that they truly want to invest and motivate their time behind. So if we want these programs to be successful, I just think making sure that every audience group is captured and they all have the ability to kind of voice what their priorities are and why.
Yeah, and Joe, building off that, it can be a challenge to go from a controlled environment to a real application. And so I was wondering, do you have any advice for people as you're making that shift, as well as do you have any success stories in the space that you think is worth sharing?
Well, I think having the cross-functional meetings together in one place and regularly checking in is good, but that team should be building metrics and a plan and be measuring the results of their plan. And, that those metrics should be cascaded down to each level of the company so that, a lot of people like to do things top-down, but to me, it's always better to do bottom-up. So if I can get a manager with 15 locators and responsibility for incidents in a county, if I could get them passionate about the overall metric, I have a multiplier effect across my whole company driving down damages. And, your theme on frontline workers, no matter what process you're working on, get yourself in a truck 10 times a year for that process, and you'll find by the end of the first cup of coffee, by the end of the first stop, you will know every single thing that is wrong with that process, and then you slowly build that into your action plan. But it really comes down to the workers in the field and then being passionate about the process improvement, and then it's like magic. You know, you're encouraging, you're not driving.
Absolutely. And so I guess building off that, Joe, like, is there a particular project that you think, again, this is a challenge for our industry, but when we work in silos as much as we do, particularly in the gas innovation team at National Grid, where what I'm doing, sometimes I'm bugging different departments, but I am constantly trying to be the one that's hopping over those fences. And ultimately what ends up happening is, how do you market a success? How do you tell people internally and externally and make other people aware of a success? And so do you have a success, and how did you essentially accomplish that?
Yeah, so one example I'll use, 20 years ago when Common Ground Alliance was just getting started, I got put into a job like many of you have, where I was in charge of damage prevention. And the first thing I did was talk to the union leaders, get their support, go out and get in a truck with 15 of my locate people, go out and meet with all of their bosses and get all their ideas, put together a cross-functional team, go visit other utilities and see what they were doing. And I put together, took about 6 weeks, put together a comprehensive improvement plan. And we, similar to this story in Virginia, we reduced our damage rate, for a decade. We reduced our cost per unit for a decade. We got it built into everybody's comp. And so now the whole company focused on that and those types of things. But the damage prevention transformation in New Jersey would be the example that I would use. Now, I believe it got stale. That team, that was not the fashionable part of the company. Once it got to, at that particular company, once you're in top quartile, the pressure's off. Then you find another process that's got to get to top quartile nationally. So, you got to constantly reinvent ways to make your process important within the context of everything else.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'd add to that is, we're saying, how do you qualify it as a successful program? I think every level may have a different item that they view as successful. So Bancker, with damage prevention at National Grid, we started a vacuum excavation problem locate program. So as everyone's aware, the locating has its deficiencies, whether it's a result of mapping, prior deficiencies in construction. There's a lot of risk out there, and the locators are doing everything within their means, but they're not 100%. So we met with engineering, we met with damage prevention, and we said damages are typically occurring on problem locates. So when we first rolled out this program, we test hole and vacuum excavated every single problem locate and verified them. And it was great. We had no damages during that period of time. So it was successful. But for the guys out in the field, what it meant is now I have to do all these additional excavations. So it wasn't necessarily successful for them. We took it back to engineering, damage prevention, and then engineering said, it's not really successful for me. I have to pay all this additional cost up front. So having all these different conversations, having iterations, we eventually evolved into a situation where we were still test hole and vacuum excavating problem locates that were located with mapping. If it had a good tone, then we felt comfortable that the technology installed would give you a proper tone. That helped alleviate some of the costs, which was a win for the engineering side. For the damage prevention side of things, it was a win for them because we were still vacuum excavating high-risk utilities. And then from the construction side, what we were able to do is put the vac truck, rather than a head where they would have to re-excavate these validation excavations, the vac truck went with the main crew, and there wasn't double excavation work. So it started off with a success in damage prevention, but having conversations, we were able to have successful or benefits to engineer and damage prevention, and then the construction crew, which motivated them to want to be part of this program. So I think that's important, just making sure that it's successful and something that everyone wants to use as well.
Yeah. So this is an interesting topic because as everyone in our industry becomes much more focused on near-term cost containment, right? How do we also make the case for gas innovation or innovation in the space just whatsoever? And so, Rod, we can start with you, but ultimately, it can be almost at first glance a little bit in conflict until you realize that this is actually the potential with which we can start making meaningful change.
Yeah, I'm going to steal something from earlier. When Sarah said that our system for 811 has to end up being easy, that's how I look at everything from a cost perspective for all innovations or anything that you're going to do from damage prevention or anything. It has to be easy. Another thing it has to be is it has to be cost effective. And third, it has to actually solve a problem. So it has to be something that's going to make sense to the group of people that are going to be utilizing it. So those are what I always use as a basis as like my litmus test to say, hey, this is something cool, it's shiny, it's nice, but is it actually going to check off the other three things that I need it to be?
And Joe, same question to you, but especially as you advise parties on kind of challenging and getting entry into new markets, how do you also help them tackle that same problem?
How do I what?
How do you help them tackle the same problem of just the conflict or potential perceived conflict of a cost-constrained sector coupled with entering into gas innovation where sometimes return on investment is not guaranteed?
Yeah, I agree with your point, the point on process improvement. You have to have a vision or a metric or an opportunity that you want to go after, and then you find the technology that could apply to that. A big example for that right now is distributed energy resources. California has 1 million solar systems on roofs, but they're not smart and integrated, and we're still buying peak power and they have the highest power prices in the nation. And with AI and technology and integrating batteries with solar, et cetera, you could probably supply 50% of the load by demand management and integration of that. So that's a big problem. AI is on the horizon. No one has cracked it. And that's an example of a great opportunity. So as you're running your innovation group, you have a fixed budget. You got IGT, all the different research groups, whatever the letters are now. But you got to prioritize your research and investment dollars toward your biggest problems, so you can be victorious in the end. And safety and customer always have to be factored into that decision-making process.
Just to add on that, and I was thinking about this during the last panel, Hallen Construction today has 100 crews out in the field, so we have approximately 100 excavations open in New York City. Bancker, Bonds, between the three of us, I'm sure somebody came across a mismapped, unmapped utility today. We submit the data. We send it to 811. We hope that data is being used to make maps better. We don't know. It's not like we get, the positive reinforcement back saying like, hey, yeah, this wasn't there. We updated it. It's much better now. Thank you. So I think I'm all about thinking outside the box and innovation, but there's so many processes that we do today already that we can do just a little bit better, and especially now with technology, even just, photographic evidence of these things that are happening right now. When the excavation is open, it's open all day today. At the end of the day, it's going to be shut. When it's shut, that opportunity is gone. So what can we as excavators do with that information to make the whole system better with processes that are already existing?
No, and I love that answer, and it's amazing because it took us 42 minutes, but we finally got to those two main letters, which was AI, when Joe brought it up. And there's a panel this afternoon that's going to touch on it, but it's impossible to have a panel discussion about innovation and not touch on AI in some respect. And so this is a question for anyone in the group, and then I'm going to open it up to audience questions thereafter. But in a field that's evolving as rapidly as AI is, how do we position ourselves to succeed when it's, one, a little black boxy? So, I myself work in the gas innovation space, and I get fielded questions all the time. Are you interested in this? And it's impossible for me to be an expert in all things AI. It's just evolving at a rate that I can't follow at the very least. And so how do we position each one of our companies to potentially make use of this evolving tool, but simultaneously, do we have to maintain a certain level of skepticism, or do you have any advice for the audience? And we can start with Rod and
So I would say that one of the areas that we're actively using the catchphrase AI is on our design build jobs again, where we look at our initial quantities and how we're going to execute the job, whether it be the shoring systems as well, and then we see what actually ends up coming into place, like what are your final quantities once IFC drawings are there, and then what is your final quantities after you go out there and you actually excavate and you find 30% of your what you thought was going to be the route that you chose for a transmission line is now going to be changed because there's utilities there that you didn't know. So having that information helps educate your decisions at the very, very front end of your business. And the same goes with the sheeting and shoring systems. That's one of the biggest cost drivers that we have in our business. And a lot of jobs we like to start out with how do you minimize that cost, and then but what do you actually end up to? So as you see quantity growth, a lot of times you see complexity of shoring growth, which then grows obviously the total installed cost of your product. So that's one thing what we're doing. We're trying to take that information, utilize it from the estimate phase, track it throughout the engineering phases, and then final quantities and final execution. So that way we know where we stood versus our original information, and then we can be more predictive in how we estimate and bid jobs.
Yeah, so many opportunities. I'll just cherry pick one and talk about mapping. So I'm a fantasy football guy, and I was the best at fantasy football before the internet was invented, because nobody knew the stats better than me and the teams. And then the internet came, and anybody could beat me in fantasy football now. I haven't won a title in 15 years. Even my wife can beat me. Then I spent so much time trying to get my technicians to be more efficient. If we covered 10 leaks a day, I wanted to cover 20 leaks a day. If I did 10-meter sets, I wanted to do 20-meter sets. And we would have these paper maps. They were county map books, and every time I'd get in the truck, they'd open up the map book and decide how they were going to drive past their favorite deli and their dry cleaner to get to the first job. And then, boom, go Google Maps. And I spent a lot of money on software on intelligent routing. If you never heard the term intelligent routing, you're very young. But I looked at intelligent routing. And then when I had my maps, and like all the Northeast utilities, 50% of my facilities were put in the ground before 1970. And they would tell me, if people didn't have a high school degree, they had to go work in the street department. And in the street department, they were the guys who drew the paper maps on the napkins with a little measuring stick from a fire hydrant that was gone. So I had all these, and we would have to go in and take paper copies of obsolete paper maps that were, some of them were 100 years old. And I look at what 4M's doing with the maps, and I'm looking, and so Google came along, they developed the map. No need for that. Well, now we have all these paper records, and you can develop an underground Google system from this development. And can you imagine if you didn't have to worry about anything? You just assumed that those maps were accurate, and we could prove that they're more accurate than a conglomeration of poorly developed records from the first part and mismarked paint, that the iteration of the paint from the satellite is actually better, and we can use it for design and marking. That would be breakthrough, and it would be something that would be transformational for the damage prevention industry.
Do you want to touch on it too?
Yeah, we come primarily from the gas space, work in power, but because we have move our workforce around so much, all of our workers have operator qualifications. Like on average, our employees, we're talking about anywhere between 60 to 70 hours of education a year, constantly requalifying. We look at that as an investment. Even with that, with all the regulation on pipeline, we still make mistakes. And the first thing one of our workers says to us is like, Case, what do you want me to do? I don't have x-ray vision. I've been hearing that for years now. So then when we started conversations with 4M a couple of years ago, the first thing that came to my mind was augmented reality. Like I was too old for the Pokemon Go phase of life out there, but I remember seeing oh, that's pretty cool. And forget Pokemon, throw utilities out there. To be able to see utilities through whether it's a phone or metaglasses or a tablet, that just always was this wild concept to me. Tomorrow, it's going to be amazing to see. We're going to be giving a phone to a foreman so they can see this augmented reality of utilities. And in the ground. And I just think this is a huge step forward. 2 years ago, it's like, oh, that's impossible. Tomorrow we're doing it. Who knows what's going to happen 2 years from now? And like I was saying at the beginning of the panel, it's all about the end user, the guy that has the shovel in his hand and is doing the actual work. If we can make their life a little bit easier, get them excited about it, feel safer about it, and make them feel like, God forbid, like tomorrow I'm set up for success. So if I'm not going to hit something and lose my operator qualifications, that's the goal. And I'm very encouraged by that. So tomorrow's going to be a big day for us.
Yeah, Alex, anything you want to add?
Yeah, if you're part of my field team, they've all heard me say it 1,000 times. The field guys, we want them to be live gas professionals. They get paid to do that. It's what they do best. The second we start distracting them with paperwork that doesn't necessarily have any definitive intention and it's more just to check a box, I think that we start distracting them from what they do best, which is live gas work. So what Bancker has explored, and it sounds like having programs like 4M that can start taking some of those new societal requirements of just over paperworking these guys to death and having them focus on tapping the gas main correctly, locating their facilities correctly, and not having to worry about OQ vetting. If a what's the markout ticket number? The job brief if we could start, automating those boxes that do need to get checked, especially in the world that we live in today, but make it an easier task for them to complete. And again, it's not guys that like that world, live in that world, and we can continue to keep having them focus on successful utility work, then I think that's where AI stands to benefit us all the most.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, I can throw it over to audience questions if there's any. I will note that I'm hyper aware of the fact that the 5 of us are standing between you and your lunch. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll do the mic running. So.
Hey, thanks everyone. The excavator perspective is very important. Shoot me down. You prove me wrong, right? If there's a meme that, there's that meme that says prove me wrong. But one of the ideas that was discussed a few years earlier was free vacuum trucks. If the state of New York gave excavators free vacuum trucks so that you can call in a vacuum truck to address that failure to pothole root cause. So one of the biggest root causes in the CGA DIRT report for excavator-related damages is failure to pothole or failure to maintain clearance. But if the excavators had an access to a free vacuum truck to get there and expose the underground and get closer to that ground truth, because 4M is the closest to the ground truth. But if you had a guaranteed way to see the ground truth, would that help?
You guys want to start?
Well, I don't know about free, but I can tell you when I went to PG&E 5 years ago, I was very surprised. I couldn't find a shovel. I never saw a person on a shovel in 5 years, and I go out in the field a lot. It's all vac. Every single crew has a vac truck with a wand, with a water pick, and they shoot the dirt with the water, and they suck it out of the trench, and they drop it into a dump truck, and they take it away. And having cost per unit targets my whole career, I couldn't imagine how any company could ever afford it. But damages went away. The self-inflicted damages went away, and all of our contractors had. And they cost $1 million a truck.
I personally, I think the idea is great, but my fear is that it ends up becoming like the markout 811 ticket system, where I'm just going to start calling in this free vac truck everywhere, and eventually I'm going to get to that job. And then eventually, where do you send that vac truck for it to be effective? So I think tying it into the day-to-day operation creates efficiency. It allows the transfer of information to be more streamlined and direct to the people that it needs to get to. But I do think the encouraging of the vac truck is something that we need to continue going with.
I'll take 100.
So I'm an excavator. So one of the most successful projects we had is we had a client that required a software like 4M. We had to use it. All of our utilities were already mapped inside of it. We had to install all of our utilities. We had to as-built it as we went along. Really successful. We're hitting nothing the entire time. I'd like to see more clients requiring that software. and driving it down and helping us out. Just a statement. I don't know if you guys have had any requirements with that. It was a municipality on Long Island that required the use of the software.
Yeah, I mean, I've said the same thing internally, and a lot of people within our company have. I think the software is best pushed down by our clients, them either utilizing it or forcing us to utilize it. I've thought that the whole time.
It's for the panelists. So Sarah said it, the previous panelist said it with Roger and Pete, and you guys said it as well. Everything revolves around the same common denominator, whether it's the excavator, the guy with the pogo stick, or the guy in the shovel, is the guy, right? The human factor is the problem here. So whatever we do, and you make the point of it, whatever we do, got to focus back on the human factor. We're all fallible creatures, right? So we're going to make mistakes. The excavator break down, it stopped working. We break down, we continue working until we make a mistake, right? So what can we do as a utility operator, National Grid, Con Ed, help you guys to make your life easier? The paperwork, that's not going to go away anytime soon, okay? So yeah, you just got to live with it, all right? So that's going to stay. But what can we do to help you guys make your life a little easier, make sure there's minimized mistake by your guys? Because the guys making the mistake is the guy with the shovel on the ground, which is you guys.
I would say sometimes just uniform in what the company's priorities are, what the utilities' priorities are. A lot of times we have, the vision for zero damages in a year, and everyone stands by that and wants that. And I don't necessarily think zero is achievable, especially if we're not changing anything we're doing, but I do think we can improve. And I think, that message starts at the top, but once you get to the construction site, a lot of that is lost. And we have means of doing insert services, and instead of doing that because we're concerned about a future load 100 years from now, we're running and shooting missiles or open cutting new service lines for something that's never going to happen. So I think if we could have a more clear and consistent and constant message across all the departmental lines, I think that would help. And we're doing pipe replacement, and now we're focused on pipe upgrades. And that message of what you guys really wanted to accomplish got lost and changed, and it's just a game of telephone. And this is, I guess, what I see as an excavator. I'm sure you could probably agree with some of that.
Oh, no, without a doubt. I always go back to an IA or an incident afterwards. What's the first thing that's happened after a contractor hits a utility? Pull the quals, suspend them. No questions asked, just pull the quals. We have this knee-jerk reaction when there's a failure, yet when our guys are successfully finding things that are not mapped or 15 or 20 feet off the map and there's no incident, it's crickets. Guys are doing that every day. Create a rate that's a leading indicator, patting the guys on the back when they're doing their job every single day, the right way, the safe way, not just recognizing failure when that happens, as infrequent as it does.
I think having regular meetings with all your contractors where you review their costs and their quality, and always have a segment on damage prevention. We had 30 hits this month. What can we do to help you prevent them? Keep a running list, track it. But regular emphasis on damage prevention. Also through your contracts, when you write your contracts, make it a priority. Get damage rates into the assessment process. And at times you have to shut your contractors down when they have an egregious event, so that it creates the word spreads across the whole group, and those types of things.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say, but since you brought it up, I think the IA process has a significant flaw in it, where there is no branch where a guy went out there and just made a bad decision. Everything ends up having to fall into a procedural deficiency, something needs improvement, a process has a flaw in it, the tool was the wrong thing. And a lot of times none of those things are true, and we're forced to pick one of those things when at the end of the day, the guy needed to be held accountable. And we leave that room too many times revising codes and standards or work practices, and all we're doing is just making it more confusing. And we're not actually fixing anything. And again, obviously there's a loyalty to our employees, our field guys, and we don't want to see them get in trouble. But I guess our responsibility as managers is to prevent or to protect the 300, not the one guy that's acting maliciously. And when you don't have a tree that helps you hold guys accountable like that, then I think you're just allowing these things to continue. And I know I've sat in IAs for topics that have already occurred. So the work practice hasn't gotten any better, and the accountability out in the field clearly hasn't been addressed. So I would like just to see a better root tree or root analysis occur.
Thank you. I agree. Penalty drives compliance. I agree. There has to be like you said, there has to be a patting the back from time to time when the right things are done. I agree. No, thank you very much.
All right, well, with that, we'll be available, but I want to thank the panel, and yeah, let's go have some lunch.